So, chat, I made a video a couple of days ago talking about there may be some players that complain about the diverse format. And a great content creator, by the way, go ahead and check him out. He's a great content creator. He made a video talking about how the format, excuse me, he made a video talking about how the format is too wide. Now, as you already know, as a content creator myself, I'm going to be reacting and responding to the things he has to say because, again, there are some players that think that this diversity that's happening in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a bad thing. Let's go ahead and react.
This was the most fair Tier 0 format we've ever had, and I know...
He just said tier was the most fair tier. Huh? What? Hey, Snake Venom is the most fair Venom we've ever had. Bro, it's still toxic. Bro, we ain't even started the video. He ain't even started the video, and he said tier is the most fair. What? Holy crap. It's almost like you've been with that one girlfriend. You've been through with several girlfriends. You're like, well, that's the least toxic, bro. She burned down your car. What? What? He just started off. Bro, chill out.
A lot of people are already just beside themselves with this point, but I do want to talk about why I think this is. This is going to tie in with the fact that these were awful to play against. Okay. So, when we played against Goki and we played against Pepe, if you went second into these decks, you auto-lost. We did not have half the outs that we do today to these decks.
I agree.
So if these decks just went unchecked and they just like went ahead and did their whole turn, you were losing your hand, you weren't playing the game. There's so many things that just were so wrong with these formats. You win
compared to Zoo and Necros. Actually, Necros, I wouldn't even say was tier 0. Necros felt really fair. Like, as fair as it could get for a really powerful deck, right? But Zoo was
up against these super crazy decks, and we didn't have Nibiru, like we didn't have anything at the time, which is pretty interesting. So definitely some pretty overpowered decks for what they were. When we talk about the most fair, I want to just say that fair does not always equal balanced, and that's a shout out to my Discord mod and friend, Squid. I brought that up in conversation, and I do agree that there's got to be some check at some point to where you can't just get outskilled, I guess, if you want to call that, by your opponent just milling pen, right? And that's totally understandable. But this is through a scope of tier, even if you go second into the matchup, you still had a way to play, and you have so many options to go ahead and beat this deck.
Bro, what is he on, chat? This is the most fair tier 0 we've... Again, I think I have to draw a comparison back to the toxic girlfriend. But like, yeah, that's the most fair toxic girlfriend we have. She's still toxic. This is still a tier 0 format. The purpose of the game is not to be in a tier 0 format. So to judge that, I can't even think of another, like, it's the best card that I've ever had, but you've had like a 1950, I couldn't even, like a Hyundai. They're not going anywhere, guy. What are we getting at?
Also had the addition of 9 Bistrels at the time that you can main deck, that people were doing to go ahead and stop this deck. You could play Flu, you could play Exo, you can main deck Shifter. There's a lot of different ways you could play into tier. Now, not saying that it was really objectively bad if you weren't playing tier into tier, but at the same time, you had a chance. And I think that's something that we really overlook in a lot of the older formats like Pepe and Goki, where you didn't have a chance, right? Like, you played against these decks, you went second, you lost at IRL, I'm sorry you lost. And there's this new quantifier as to what tier 0 is, and that's realistic.
Okay, before we get to the quantifier, I see sounds like Stockholm Syndrome. No, that's not how it worked, dog. You could have, if you drew the correct outs to both Goki and Performapal, you would be able to stop their turn too. Fortunately enough, Performapal didn't last long enough, but you know, to be that catastrophic. Well, the ridiculous version. But Ghost Ogre was a fairly strong card against them. So was Effect Veiler, and against the Goki deck, multiple interruptions like Ash in Effect Veiler and stuff like that was also fairly effective. I think what he fails to understand, or what he fails to mention, is that while tier limits did not make the insane board if unchecked like these decks did for their time, tier limit was a strategy that played on the opponent's turn. It had the advantage of making a board when your opponent started the turn going first, which already creates an unfair advantage. It was ridiculously just unfair to see that deck thrive. And you could actually say it was just as unfair as the other decks, because these decks were not playing turn 0 on your opponent's turn or any given time during our turn. And that's what objectively made it one of the worst decks to play against, no matter how you put it. Yes, there's outs to tier limit. There's also outs to Performapal, and there's outs to Gokis. There's outs to everything. But just saying that, oh, there were counters and ways to play around it, doesn't justify that the deck was ridiculously busted, which is the reason why we were in a tier 0 format.
Realistically, like 30 out of 32 slots at a big event that you are now quantified as a tier 0 deck.
Wait, what? Hold on.
You lost. And there's this new quantifier as to what tier 0 is, and that's realistically like 30 out of 32 slots at a big event that you are now quantified as a tier 0 deck.
So he's saying that you have to take up 30 of the 32 slots to be considered a tier 0 deck? Okay. I don't know if that's the new quantifier or whatever thing. Back in my day, and you know I'm old, it used to be 50% of representation over a prolonged period of time would make tier 0. I still think that 50% of representation over a prolonged period of time it's still pretty crazy. 60, 65 of the top cut, I still think that that's like tier 0 realm. Like, that means that your deck is well prepared for, people are well prepared for your deck, and you're still topping at over a half percentage rate. Your conversion rate is crazy. Now 90%, bro, we're in a tier -1 format. I can't think of too many times where that happened. I don't even think these decks topped at that rate. I'd have to look it in, but I don't remember these decks topping at that rate. I just don't.
Which is definitely interesting.
Okay.
But
Maybe
looking back, I feel like these were so obnoxious, where if you played against like D-Ruler, I don't even feel like that was that bad. Playing against Zoo, I thought
what?
The mirror matches were really skillful. It wasn't like super crazy. Even like tier, I know a lot of people disagree, but I feel like if
okay, he's going back to tier. He's definitely a tier limit player. Chat, playing against Dragon Ruler was terrible. It was the worst format ever. I don't know if he's like went back into the format and played, or if he played in the original beginning. But the problem with Dragon Rulers weren't necessarily the Dragon Ruler cards. It wasn't necessarily Draco Sack either. It was Super Rejuvenation and Vanity's Emptiness. Vanity's Emptiness prevented you from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And since Draco Sack was on the field, it couldn't be destroyed. That's huge when you just can't special summon. Super Rejuvenation is ridiculous because it allowed them to use all of the resources and then get a full hand of cards like Maxis and Effect Veilers. Those were the ridiculous things about the deck. And if it ever did go against a deck that could contest it like Spellbook, it had monsters like Light and Darkness Dragon that could be easily searchable and easily summonable. One of the first decks to actually put up 4 negates and have follow-up. And on top of that, it had cards like Eradicator, Epidemic Virus. So no, during that format, Dragon Ruler, I would not say was fair. It was very unfair considering the other decks around it. Zodiac, there's nothing fair about Zodiac. There was definitely nothing fair about turning 1 card into 4.
if you had a really big issue with tier, you probably just didn't play tier, which is totally understandable. But at the same time, another reason why I thought this format was really nice was this is probably one of the cheapest tier 0 decks we ever had. Now, planets were like 90s to 100s, but that was pretty much the whole cost for the most part. Like, even the entire Mama engine wasn't expensive. The Kelbecks, I think, were like $10 a piece or so, but like not really super crazy. So overall, I thought that the deck was really nice to have in the game. Not only
weren't the Bystials, how much was Bystial Magnemite? Again, I'm not trying to pick apart the argument, but let's put that to the side. Still $300 for 3 cards. Like, what? I think his problem, or not his problem, but the problem with his stance is that, let's just say hypothetically, Tier Limit is the cheapest tier 0 format. Let's say we broke down the numbers and Tier Limit by far was the cheapest tier. It still was an expensive deck. Kind of like his argument that it was the best tier 0 format to be in, it's still a tier 0 format. Those are not enjoyable for 90% of the community. And unfortunately, the 90% of community matters more than the 10% of competitive players.
only just for the really skillful mirror matches that you got into, because at that point, like, you don't always just
The
lose to
mirror matches
Dweller. And I
were
feel like that's
skills,
the
though.
first thing that pops in everyone's mind.
got-
It's like, well, what happens if you get Dweller?
couldn't
There's
tell
been
you, I ain't
multiple
played
times
tier-
on stream in mirror matches where someone gets
I saw
Dweller
it.
and wins the game. And it's just the way that you play the deck, the way that you can
Wait, hold
interact.
on.
And I think all that really does matter. If you play into a format like Goki, like Pepe, there wasn't a whole lot of interacting going on. It was you setting your hand down, watching your opponent do the combo, hoping they mess up, and if they don't, you lose.
Isn't tier like that though? Really? Like, aren't people just tricked to think that tier is interactive and fun because of the things that you can do on your opponent's turn? Like, if they Dweller and then mill 10, you're not winning. I don't see a world where they go Dweller in mill 10 and you survive that match. And that is not something that the deck, like, the deck could do it consistently. I mean, like, it just doesn't. I don't disagree with tier limit being a more skilled matchup, but I do disagree with him saying that these almost have the same interactions. If you give two people the exact same cards and you tell them, yo, play, then of course there's going to be variations. They're going to figure out other things to play against each other. They're going to optimize their deck, and this is competitive Cali speaking. They're going to optimize their deck, and they're going to have the exact same cards giving them the exact same skill, making it a skillful format, quote unquote, wouldn't it? If they go uninterrupted, I mean, if tier limit makes, again, like I said, if tier limit makes a Bizdweller or something like that, we're still in the same spot.
So it's just one of those things where you got to take the good with the bad. And I think that having these types of formats, I completely get it. Like, these types of formats are awful. You cannot do anything except play this one deck.
We can agree to
Not
that.
fun, right? Like, these are just uninteractable. I think that if you have a deck like tier where there was other options, you could go second. There's a slew of things that you can side or just main deck to deal with this. I think that that's a bit better. I do like these in general, though. Just the one deck formats. Personally,
All right, guys.
I think that they're really something that comes down to technical play, and it's not just something that comes from variance. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. The other thing, too, is I actually made another slide here about the fact that narrow formats are really easy to join the game in, or at least easier. So if you're trying to teach someone how to play, it's not like they're coming in and having to learn 30 decks all at once. It's, here are the best 3 decks you have to worry about. Then you can kind of context clear your way into the other matchups that you play against, because you already know how the best decks work at the time. So therefore, you should be able to understand how the other decks work as well. And I think this is a really important factor, at least for me, whenever I'm trying to like coach or teach. You always get in these conversations about, well, there's 100 different decks, what do I play? And then you get into the other conversation of, I only have 15 side deck cards. How do I mitigate this situation? And this actually cost me a top 8 at a regional.
Okay. This is way too much information to take in at once, one step at a time. He said that Yu-Gi-Oh! Formats are easier to join when it's 3 top decks. Okay. Let's say if you had all the money in the world, right? Because let's look at the 3 top decks that he's pointing to. I don't think either 3 of these were cheap. I think that these were all moderately expensive Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks. We couldn't just get 3 structure decks and be okay with these particular decks, right? And actually, now that I think about it, this was not a 3-deck format. This was like a 5-deck format, but beside the point. I'm trying to stay on it. I think Solomon Great, unless I'm wrong, Solomon Great and Altergeist were also pretty good in this format as well. He says that it's good because it's less to learn, so it's easier to teach. I can't disagree with that. My only beef with that is that it doesn't matter when you play the format, right? It literally, you're gonna have to learn stuff regardless. Like, it's not like the only people are going to be playing this deck. There's going to be tons of people playing tons of other decks that you're still going to have to pick up, or you could potentially lose. I think the difference is, and these 3-deck formats, let's just say that these are the top 3 decks. In these 3-deck formats, these have an overwhelming advantage against almost every other Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. So you don't need to learn them because you're already in a situation where if you do what you need to do, you're going to win no matter what. And that is not conducive to teaching a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player how to become a better player.
Because when you're looking at a competitive event, if there's too many decks to decide for, you have...
Not to mention, most meta decks are difficult as hell to learn from. You're not wrong. most metal decks are really difficult. You actually start them off on something that's, if they're like just jumping straight into the game, you start off on something really, really simple and then build their way up. Like, no way would I tell a player jumping into the game to play a deck like Rika. Like, no way. You know what I mean? It's like not happening. I also wouldn't tell them to play a deck like Pearly or Rescue Ace, because that deck may seem linear, but it gets off into things where you're like, what am I doing?
Have to do what we call making a concession, and that's, I'm just not going to side this type of card because I don't have room for it, and quite frankly I'm more worried about other things. And that was a format where back row removal just wasn't real. Like, nobody really played it, and I didn't play it, and my one loss at the end of the tournament was to just a back row deck, and it was unfortunate, but my deck was built to beat the rest of the room, as there was more combo than there was control, but it was still such a wide meta that I couldn't really do a whole lot with the side. So I think that's one thing that is really frustrating to a lot of players too, where people want these like crazy diverse metas, but at the same time, when it comes down to like just playing the game, and then you figure out that you don't have enough slots and you start running into random matchups, it's not the best, because when you go to an event and you're spending a lot of time, you really want to make sure that you have the most optimal list as possible. Now, the other response I've been getting a lot of is the
to add on to that, my last Las Vegas regionals that I went X3. I was prepared for all of the decks in the room. Like, I was like ready for the best decks that I could think of. My first round I played against Centurion. We didn't have the deck, so we didn't practice. So I didn't know about the deck. And he knew the nuances between the deck. I understood what he did, but I didn't have enough practice, so I took an L. My second round, I played against Brandon. Like, who plays Brandon? Like, not a soul. You know what I mean? We wound up tying. I didn't go X3, I'm sorry. We wound up tying. My third round, I played against Runic. Stun. So, 3 decks that I wasn't prepared for, but to be honest, I don't think I lost because I wasn't prepared for it. I lost, well, I mean, a part of it had to go with, not being prepared for it. But I lost because when I saw the situation, I didn't address the situation as a new situation. My small brain self decided to try, I'm just going to play like this, instead of adapting to the situation that I'm in. And that's the reason why I lost. And I think a lot of players, they don't like being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And once they do get uncomfortable, they tend to lose games. That's not how Yu-Gi-Oh should be. Yu-Gi-Oh should be about adversity and overcoming adversity, and that's what makes you a good player. So I do agree that diversity does make it a lot harder to play, but at the same time, isn't skill just an expression of adversity and being able to overcome it and having hard situations to overcome?
The competitive pro players are just really lazy and they don't want to learn a wide meta.
Yeah,
that could not be more incorrect than anything I've ever heard in my entire life. I feel like if you're really competitive and you're studying the game, one thing that you're not going to do is just quit when there's an open meta. You're just not going to do that. We are going to say that it's really not a great format overall because there's too much to worry about. At that point, it becomes way more variance than skill. And that's where I talk about variance does not worry about. At that point, it becomes way more variance than skill. And that's where I talk about variance does not equal skill.
Here's one thing you need
Come on, we got hit with the ad.
to do before buying anything online. Don't spend another dime on Amazon until you watch the
If we're going down to like a triangle format, for example, I love triangle formats. I think they're very fun. One deck beats the next deck, that deck beats the next deck, and you just have this really cool situation where usually all those decks play objectively different, and that's why they beat each other. So there's a variety of options that you can choose from, and the different decks that you can play are usually very limited. And this is where it comes down to a lot more technical play, because you have to learn how to beat your bad matchup. And a lot of times that's catering your main deck to beat your bad matchup because your other matchup is already free.
What? Did you hear what he said? No! No! He said this. He said he likes a triangle format more because there's what he said. Go play rock, bro. That's what he said, because you have to cater to your bad matchup because your other matchup is free. What skill expression is there of having free matchups? What? So, like, huh? Like, that doesn't make, like, that, what? I don't even understand. Oh, that doesn't, go play rock, paper, scissors is definitely it. In a triangle format, one deck beats the other, that beats the other, that beats the first deck. So, if you play against a deck that you're weak against, you almost automatically lose. There's obviously situations where you can win, and that does feel good to be able to overcome those situations. But by his own words, well, you had other matchups that are free. You just said that they're free. So what's going on here? Like, I don't understand. Like, is it a free matchup or is it a skill expression? Because free matchups aren't skill. Oh my God.
So that's like Striker and Orchist. Very free matchup. And then you have...
Don't do it to yourself. You didn't just do that. No.
Your other matchup is already free. So that's like Striker and Orchist. Very free matchup. And then you have Dean Gearsu to send like a Thunder Dragon. Very solid. Or you just pass on Colossus and stare at Striker, right? So definitely a lot of very interesting things that were coming up in the formats. But I do think that it is really important to note that variance does not equal skill. If you lose to a super crazy random deck just because there's so many decks in the format, is that really something that you could have prepared for?
No, but that's the thing. That's the thing. Preparation doesn't all, and I'm not saying that there's no skill in triangle formats, guys. There's skill. There's skill. It's just when you have a 60-40 disadvantage, or maybe even a 70-30 disadvantage, or even 80-20 in some situations, and it does feel good to win when you're on that 20 side. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily skillful, right? It actually means that you overcame a terrible situation, but what does that mean for the opponent? You know what I mean? Skill is better. I think skill is better defined when the matchups are closer to 50-50, like a tier 0 format, right? That would be one expression of skill because both players have the same set of cards. But skill can also be expressed in variance because you can't prepare for everything, so adapting on the fly or changing the methodology of how you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Because your opponent is playing X and so is skill. Having knowledge of the strategy of the obscure strategy that your opponent is playing is skill. It takes time, effort, and actual knowledge of the game to be able to see an obscure deck and know exactly what your opponent is doing and how to counter it, even if you don't play the necessary cards to just immediately stop the deck. Is that not skill? Am I wrong? Yeah, you shouldn't pray for free wins. You just take them as they come and build for facing the best decks. That's what I'm saying. And again, I'm not saying that tier 0 formats aren't skillful, right? But I'm also saying that skill can be expressed in multiple ways. And a variance format is also a very big skill expression. When I sit down and I go against my opponent's Battling Boxer deck, I thank the heavens because I know what Battling Boxers do. As opposed to someone that hasn't studied enough, they may get punished in the beginning, but they also get a learning experience if they lose, or B, they get to sit down and they get to watch and test themselves actually against the unknown, which is skillful.
Probably not. But if it goes down to...
This guy's whole argument is anecdotal with no hard evidence. I think both of our arguments could be considered that, right?
A format where you're actually having the ability to study a format, because
the adaptability of facing variance is higher show of skill than mirror match. I believe so.
I feel like this wide meta that we're in right now, this isn't even a format. It's just a free-for-all. And that's something that I don't think is very good for the competitive side of the game at all. And that's one thing where when there's like 30 decks, you can't simply prepare for everything. You can't. And if you say you can, you're capping. Like, it won't work. I think that it's really important to note, like, if you are going into a competitive event, you want to do well, you spend the money to travel,
so
and you're really confident with your deck list, how would you feel if you sat down and played against like 9 different decks for the day? You would lose your mind because your whole deck was ready for a specific meta, and all of a sudden you're just playing against the variety deck, right? And that's just not something that anyone wants to do. I think that it's really important to note too.
Wait. There are people that want to play the same deck every round? Like, what? You want to play the exact same deck? I don't know about you guys, but when I play Vanquish Soul and I play 2 other Vanquish Soul players and like a locals, I'm like, what am I doing here, right? Or if I'm playing against Fire King, King Fires, I get a little annoyed. Like, because it puts you, don't get me wrong, even if you do have a great matchup, it just puts you in autopilot mode where you already know what to do. You already know the different lines. But seeing other decks in variance, you get surprised. You're like, oh, crap. Now I got to adjust. Like, what? I can prepare for 30 decks. It's called Public Calamity Lock. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is like food. I don't want to eat tacos, pizzas, and wings every format. I need flavors to take me to the next level. Okay, hear me out. Why wouldn't you want to eat tacos, pizza, and wings? Like, seriously. Like, I think I like what you were saying. I just didn't like the... Anyways. I faced 7 different decks in 11 rounds of the YC. Yes, it happens. I think that that's a good thing, though. If you build your deck to fight one deck, that's a skill issue. You can't build your deck to face everything, but you should be able to stay flexible. I agree. It actually makes a lot of cards bad. Like last format, because this format is pretty much a continuation of last format, there were so many different decks. Floodgate cards had a really hard time coming into the game. Like, you couldn't just side there can be only one, because, hey, here comes Vanquish Soul. There goes Branded. There goes another deck that doesn't care. You couldn't side in Gozen matches because, hey, there were decks like Fire King. There were decks that literally could play under those. So, like, it made Floodgate Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards really bad, which, I mean, isn't that good for the game? Isn't that make it more skillful? Like, hypothetically, I know we were playing. The Gimmick Puppet Lock is not good against every Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. It's not good against the Labyrinth. Rescue Ace can ironically play under it. There are so many strategies that can actually play around it. It's pretty scary, right? So, you know, my guy said tacos gets born. Yeah, he's weird, man. I agree with the sentiment. I don't agree with the choices he picked, right? If you're ordering Taco Bell every night, nobody eats Taco Bell. Give it Puppet into Rabina. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
That when it comes to deck building, I think that it's such an amazing thing to just sit down and do. I love deck building so much, but I feel like I lose a piece of that when I'm in a very diverse meta. And feel free to leave any of your comments down below and argue your point as well. Again, keep it respectful because this is a conversation that we're having about the card game that we all love. I'm just going to start deleting comments if it gets really toxic or nasty. It's just how it is. And, you know, we do see those types of comments, but at the same time, we can be constructive and we can talk about this. Because I feel like this is on everyone's mind. And that's why I'm making this video. My tweet blew up about this, so I figured that it was about time to actually being the anything that you want to play. But if you want to really do well, pick one of the 5, because you can always play anything that you want to play. But if you want to really do well, pick one of the 5 and then go into the tournament and do well.
See, I think that's I think I understand him a little bit. I understand him. He wants a structured format where, yeah, you can play whatever you want like at locals, but when we get to a more structured event, you pick one of the best decks and you have to play one of the best decks and you're only going to see some of the best decks. I understand what he's saying.
But it's taking me a little bit, but I'm starting to get there now. Now I'm feeling like, oh, okay, I know what I'm doing. Now I understand how the level up process.
And that's one thing too, where you kind of get a broader idea of like what a meta is, and if you're teaching someone the game, they can understand how to play in a meta, which is really important. Whereas if someone were to join right now and they're like, "What do I do?"
They're just
I'd be like,
steps at that time.
"Do what you want, you know, like do whatever you want." And I don't think that that's ever gonna.
We have a thing in football called see ball, get ball. We tell it to our defensive linemen, hey, you see ball, you go get ball. That's pretty much what you're teaching them in a 3-deck format. Now, don't get me wrong, you can build on top of that as time goes on, which does make it easier, but you're not teaching them Yu-Gi-Oh! You're teaching when your opponent does this, you do this. You side this. This is what you do. It becomes really, really obstructive.
Be healthy for a competitive scene ever. No. The last thing that I heard a lot.
I figured out why I disagree so hard. He's the player in a new game, asks what's the meta is before he plays the game on its own. Holy crap. Y'all said rate? There's no rate. I didn't see no rate.
About just so many comments about this was siding silver bullets.
It sounds like he's
now the number one argument, I think the weakest argument possible, is why do you enjoy formats that you can just go, hey, I sided the silver bullet, you lose? But that's not even how the game is. Like, you can side a silver bullet for a matchup, sure. Like in Snake Eye format, we're all siding Soul Release because we all know it's a very good card. But at the same time, it's not gonna end the game. And if you think about it in a more broad sense, in a competitive scene, people side deck for people side deck. So if they know that anti-spell is really popular, they're changing their L-Storms to Cosmics. So like if a lot of people are on Soul Release, a lot of people are already on Bell. So they're just going to be having Bell in their deck when they're going first. So if they get Soul Release, they can just Bell. And I think that's one thing where siding silver bullets
skill, though.
Isn't really that crazy when...
Then it doesn't become skill. It becomes who gets to see their side deck cards first. Like, if somebody sides in Soul Release for Fire King and you side in Ghost Bell and I see the Soul Release and you don't see the out, which he pretty much did, then I win. Granted, not all of the time. He's not wrong. But let's go to a situation where it's actually happened at the highest level. Somebody played Dimension Shifter against a Dragon Link deck. It was Nationals. It was last year's Nationals. It was top 4, if I remember correctly. Dude activated Dimension Shifter. He scooped. Game 2. Dude activated Dimension Shifter. He lost. So there are counters to Dimension Shifter. And I'm pretty sure as a national finalist, he had counters to Dimensional Shifter, but he didn't see him. And his opponent did. What skill expression is for that? Like, how is that skillful? Oh, my opponent had Soul Release. I didn't have the best hand, and I didn't have Ghost Bell. Like, I didn't have this godsend hand to win me the game, and I didn't have Ghost Bell, so I lose. I don't think that's skillful at all. Ironically, the way how you stop stuff like this is that you have deck diversity. Now, Shifter can't be a card that you can just play and automatically get a win against some of the top decks or whatever deck you recognize. Because there's so many other decks that it becomes a bad card. Luck is a massive part of Yu-Gi-Oh! At every level, and you can't change that. I think currently, luck is not as useful as it would be in a smaller format. And I think you guys can agree with me with that. Because obviously, if you side in cards that just win the game, then you just win the game. How many times have you guys been floodgated and it just outright won the game? I know there's a ton, guys.
You play competitively and you know how to counter the known bullets that people are siding, right? So I think that this is another one that has come up quite often that I think is just really misconstrued. Like, yeah, even right now, like if you side Shifter, you're siding a silver bullet into like 25 to 30 decks that we're playing. Does that mean that it's a crazy enough meta because you're siding silver bullets? It doesn't matter what meta you're in. You're siding a silver bullet for something, right? Like, it doesn't matter if it's a narrow format, if it's a wide format, like, doesn't matter. If you're playing Ash in your main deck, it's...
The problem with Shifter is that the card isn't... It's not as effective. It's just not as effective because there's so many decks in the game. He said 25 of the 30. I couldn't agree with that. I mean, it'll probably be more like 10, maybe 10 of the 30. But then you go against a random deck like Exosister and you Shifter them and you realize you lost another card. So...
it's the same thing as being like, oh, I destroy branded if I ash them, right? It doesn't make sense to me to say that like a format is decided by silver bullets on the side. It doesn't make sense. But I do hope that you enjoy this type of video, this kind of conversation, just my raw thoughts on the game.
These silver bullet cards become less of a reliable factor when there are more decks involved. That's what I'm trying to say. This would make more sense if Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a fighting game, but as a card game, it's luck drawing into bullets or not. Exactly. That's, bro, you said, bro, you're him. You're him. You are him. Holy crap. I was just thinking about that. I was like, yeah, if the counter is maybe like an extra that card like Zeus, then yeah, you could always prepare for it or something like that because you know it's always a constant threat. But cards like Dimension Shifter or Gozen or Anti-Spell or whatever, you can't prepare for luck. You can't prepare for your opponent opening one and then opening another one. You can't prepare for that. And that's what takes the skill out of it. Look, I don't think that he's wrong for competitive players. But like I said before, competitive players make up about roughly 10% of the community. We don't care about them, myself included. Yu-Gi-Oh! Players want to play the decks that they like, and they want to play the decks that they like at locals, and possibly even at regionals. They want to have fun. Now, fun is subjective, but from what I got from most Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, fun is when you can play your deck, which isn't always everybody's deck. Which means when, and this is from my 20 years of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm old, I know it. Everybody wants to play their own style. Everybody wants to do their own thing. And that comes with variance. When we do get variance into the format, a lot more people are having fun. I personally think that the diverse formats do have a benefit, a huge benefit for Yu-Gi-Oh! Players. To me, it reminds me closer to like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Shows, where you are more than likely to find a random person and they're playing a totally different deck that throws you off, right? And it also gives you the competitive aspect because these decks are flat out good. So I like it from that particular perspective. The competitive side of me still doesn't care because it doesn't matter in my head who I line up against or what deck that they're playing. I'm there to win. So anything else, all that other, did I prepare, blah, 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 all that shook and stuff. I'm not shook. I'm not scared. I'm the best player in the world. I'm here to beat you. It does not matter what you're playing. I am better than you, and I will impose my will on you in this game. Maybe that's the football player in me, right? Maybe that's the competitive sports guy into me, right? But overall, I think that this argument for most Yu-Gi-Oh players, they'll disagree with. I think the super competitive Yu-Gi-Oh players, they'll agree with it. And I don't think it's a wrong argument. I just think that a lot of people will not be okay with this. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think that Yu-Gi-Oh is better when there's one deck, two decks, three decks? Or do you like when Yu-Gi-Oh has a lot of decks? Always, thank you so much, GG Yu-Gi-Oh. Go ahead and check out his channel if you can for providing a video like that. It was really, really fun. And I'll catch you guys on the next one.